Hello, welcome to Spirited Discussion, a Spirit Island podcast. Today is episode 5, our Branch and Claw review. Way back in the former days, there was only the base game. And in the base game, there were no tokens and no events.
No.
But then came Branch and Claw. And we all were very happy because we like tokens.
Yeah.
At least I like the tokens, so.
Yeah, of course. Who doesn't like tokens?
People who only play the base game, I guess, or Horizons. But yes.
That's true. That's true. Okay, so yes, we are talking about Branch and Claw today. This is the expansion that gave us Strife, Wilds, Beasts, and Disease tokens.
Yeah.
26 event cards, 2 spirits, 1 adversary, 4 scenarios, 21 major power and 31 minor powers, 15 fear cards, and 7 blight cards.
Yeah, this is a really interesting box. Just a little background on it before we really get into too much of the contents. Branch and Claw was part of the original Kickstarter for Spirit Island, and if I'm remembering interviews with Eric correctly, it was part of the original design of the game. They weren't sure exactly how to fit all of it in to the original game for some complexity and cost reasons. They talked about, we could have this, but like the whole box will be ridiculously expensive, ridiculously complicated. And when you cut out some of the Branch and Claw content from your base game, you still ended up with a pretty darn fun game. Mm-hmm. And so it made sense, commercially and in some way approachably, in terms of approachability, to split the Branch and Claw out.
Yeah, I think maybe we touched on this in the base game review, but it is one of those rare examples where sectioning off content that might have been designed early on to be saved for like a next release makes sense, because it's not just like a money grab like sometimes games do, where they're like, yeah, we got this great idea, let's just save it for a day one expansion or a day one DLC. It feels like this is one of those things that you got to learn the base game first, and then you add this stuff on top of it. So having it be a second box makes sense financially, so you're not buying a really expensive board game, and also just complexity-wise.
Yeah. One other note I'll add to the history is there are 2 spirits in this box, not 4 spirits, despite there being 4 types of tokens. Mm-hmm. And people who are familiar with Spirit Island and Jagged Earth in particular will notice that Grinning Trickster stirs up trouble, Shroud of Silent Mist, and Vengeance is a Burning Plague, I guess Mist doesn't have as much to do with the tokens, but Mist and Vengeance were apparently sort of just one spirit concept initially, and then sort of got split out during Jagged Earth development.
Interesting.
So Trickster, Mists, and Vengeance are kind of the 3 spirits that could have been in Branch and Claw but weren't.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting to look at, just because the only thing really that this expansion doesn't have like a lot of content-wise is the spirits. Only 2 spirits. If you look at any other expansion, all of them have more spirits added. This one takes more of a, let's try to expand the core mechanics of the game first, and we'll give you a few extra spirits to play around with, instead of just a ton of spirits, which we get in most of the other expansions.
Yeah, which I actually like a lot, and we'll get into that now as we sort of hop into things. But let's talk, before we get into the spirits, let's talk about the tokens.
Yes. Yeah, so we gotta talk about the tokens first, because the tokens are, all of the other content in the game flows from those tokens, right? Oh, sorry, not in the game, of this expansion. The event cards, the spirits, just everything else kind of trickles down from that, because these are huge mechanics, and they want to make sure that they feel fully integrated into the game and not just something tacked on.
Absolutely, yeah. And I think this is another place where the game had as a strength that it was sort of all designed as one game, and then the tokens were split out for complexity reasons. Mm-hmm. And so there's this really good, almost backwards compatibility with the base game.
Yes.
The token integration works really well. It works really smoothly. Spirits from the original game can pick up powers and interact with tokens in all kinds of ways, but don't need to if you don't have the expansion. And so it just feels like it fits in really, like, as almost as seamlessly as I've seen a game expansion do.
Yeah, we will later, but when you look at like the major and minor decks or the fear deck or whatever, when you shuffle that into the base game, it doesn't really look like, it just looks like a deck that has these mechanics mixed in. Like, they added enough in Branch and Claw that it's not just like, here's 1 or 2 cards that have this mechanic, but otherwise you'll never see it in the deck.
Yeah. Another sort of artifact of the split with the tokens is the thematic boards. the thematic boards were all printed with tokens expected to be added to the game at some point, more or less. You have like all the setup symbols for the tokens on the thematic board. You don't actually need, although I suppose, well, we'll get to it in Jagged Earth, but Badlands weren't on there, and when we get to Nature Incarnate, Vitality.
Yeah, but yeah, no, fair point. They really did a good job. So speaking individually, you want to start with Strife?
Yeah, let's start with Strife. I hate this, Alex. Why are we doing this?
Let's argue more. It's causing me anguish.
Strife is a fun token. It's a little different than the others in that Strife is attached to a specific invader as opposed to being put into a land.
Yes.
And Strife stops that invader from participating in Ravage once and then goes away.
But importantly, it stops it from dealing damage in the Ravage. It doesn't stop them from participating.
Excuse me, that's right. That's a good distinction. Yes, it stops them from dealing damage, but they are still participating in the Ravage. That is more important than I thought. So yes, if you Strife an invader and it attacks and doesn't deal damage, then the Dahan can fight back and destroy it.
Yes, yeah. That's important because there are effects introduced later in the game that are like, or even in this expansion that are, this piece sits out. And when it sits out, it doesn't do damage and it can't take damage in the Ravage. But yes, this basically just says it tries to attack, but it just can't do anything. So yeah, in Branch and Claw, there are 4 major, 4 minor, 5 fear, 2 events, and plus the France event card that actually use it. Strife is the one that's kind of used the least, I believe. It also does not start on the board like 2 of the other tokens do. So I think it's telling us that it's a relatively powerful effect.
Yeah, and it really is. I think that the fear cards especially, we'll talk a little more about those later on in the episode, but the fear cards that add Strife, I think, are some of the coolest fear cards in the deck. I'm almost always happy when I see them come up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Strife is nice because when you have to deal with cities early in the game, it's hard. It's hard to have enough damage to be able to kill a city. It's very hard to push a city anywhere. So if you're early in the game and you're trying to prevent blight coming down, other than defending, Strife is really like a great way to kind of deal with that. And it's also, it's tied to France, so we'll get to that later.
Yeah, there's some really cool interactions with the adversary that comes in this box. So I think if Strife is our Ravage effect, let's move on to our build effect and talk a little about disease tokens.
Yeah.
Oh boy.
Nothing's funnier than jokes about disease. Okay, so disease. There are 4 major powers, 4 minor powers, 4 fear cards in Branch and Claw, and a whopping 12 events that include disease, as well as the boards all start with disease on them.
That's right.
In the same land as the city.
Yeah, land 2 on every board starts with a disease at the beginning of the game, which is very relevant because of how many event cards, as you mentioned, interact with that disease token.
Yes. So disease at a base, it just stops a build. It gets removed and stops a build.
Yep. And it does a huge number of things in interacting with the event deck. Sometimes events will add disease, move disease. Commonly, they will cause damage in lands with disease, both to invaders and Dahan.
Yes.
And so it's really kind of a dangerous token in some ways, because you can definitely lose Dahan in diseased lands. But also, disease is really great for, as we said, stopping a build. And if the invaders don't build, then they don't usually Ravage for all that much either. So
yeah, I don't know about you, but I feel like when it comes to the Dahan damage thing, that's always just an incidental thing that happens. I'd never plan. I'm never like, oh, cool, I can place a disease here. No, wait, maybe I don't want to do that because Dahan are there.
Oh, I absolutely avoid Dahan with my disease tokens.
Really? Okay.
Yeah. At least if I have the flexibility to do so. I mean, sometimes you're like, oh, this land is going to build and it's going to be horrible if it builds because I'm playing France and there's 3 explorers in it. I'll put a disease there no matter what else is in that land.
I mean, obviously, if there's a choice, I'd rather not the Dahan, but still, I don't really think about it all that much. I guess it's also a matter of, I don't know the mathematics of the event deck with future expansions included. I just know right now for Branch and Claw, there's 12 events, which that's like a third of them. It's pretty significant. And that's just ones that mention disease, I should say. Not all of these, most of these don't place disease or anything. They just interact with disease in some way.
Yeah, I'm probably I probably overreact a little bit to the Dahan and disease lands thing, but and usually it's less of I try to avoid putting disease in with Dahan as I try to get Dahan out of lands with disease. Dahan movement is generally cheaper than disease adding, in my experience, so it feels a lot easier to pull them out than to worry about trying to like put the disease somewhere. Well, rather, yeah. Anyway.
Yeah, yeah. But hey, I mean, anytime you can prevent adding a city, or as you mentioned with France, which I think France is just going to keep coming up because it's a topic that's looming, especially after last week. It's just nice. It's nice to be able to prevent a town or a city coming down.
Yeah.
Especially because you do have the foresight of knowledge of that. When it comes to the next token we're going to talk about, you don't always know where that's going to hit, but you do know where they're going to build. So if you can get a disease there, that's great. It's very much a feels bad when you plan on doing that, and then an event card comes up and it says ignore disease for this build.
Yeah, which is an edge case to plan around, and I kind of like those events in some ways because they lead to more interesting games if they don't lead to instant losses. And so the interest usually outweighs the random loss that it gives me on occasion.
Oh yeah, my hot take, maybe it's not even a hot take, it's just that sometimes you need a little bit of feels bad in your game. Sometimes you need a little bit of strife in order to make your achievements feel greater.
All right.
Okay, so moving on. Yeah. We have the wilds. Oh, sorry. I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. We're just talking over each other a little more than usual today. All right.
Okay, next up we have... No. All right, you go, Kalen. You go.
Our next token is one that you're going to get wild about. This is the Wilds token. And since I'm from Minnesota, I like the Minnesota Wild. I don't actually follow them that closely, but, Wilds, go wild.
I think of the Thornberries. But anyway, yes, so in Branch and Claw, there are 5 majors, 4 minors, 2 events, and 1 unique for Keeper, which is kind of themed a little bit around the Wilds. And that's it. That's all that mentions Wilds. They don't start on any boards. And to be honest, even in those, one of those majors is Pent Up Calamity, which mentions all the tokens, and I think another 1 or 2 of those only mention Wilds in the Threshold. So Wilds is by far the least used token in Branch and Claw.
Which kind of makes some sense to me. I think Wilds is very powerful. Have we said what it does? Wilds stops and explore. A land with a Wilds token in it does not explore if that terrain type is flipped up. Mm-hmm. And that can be incredibly powerful, although it can also sometimes be completely useless. So a Wilds token in a land with invaders already in it is kind of pointless. But a Wilds token in an empty land can be incredibly strong, assuming the invaders aren't like adjacency building or something like England.
Or that terrain never shows up.
And so that's where Wilds, I think, are a little more maybe gambly kind of a token.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And there really isn't a lot that interacts with them in interesting ways. Keeper has 1 card that lets you remove a Wilds and do 2 damage for each Wilds removed.
No, it's just 2 damage for Wilds. It doesn't remove them.
Oh.
It is awesome.
Okay.
if you can stack Wilds.
Sorry, Keeper can do damage based on Wilds, but other than that, there's not really a lot of things that interact. Like, Disease has the event card thing that can interact with it, and Strife has a lot of different, like France has a specific interaction with it, and it comes up a lot in fear cards and stuff. And then beasts are a whole different beast, which we'll get to. But I feel like Wilds are kind of left out in that they just don't have like a lot of spice to them. Like, hey, they're good, they're cool, I'm glad they're here, and you're right, they can be very impactful. Whenever you do prevent and explore with a Wilds in an empty land is like feels really good. But I just kind of feel like of all the tokens in this set, maybe Wilds could use a little bit of help somewhere.
I don't know exactly what one would do to do that, though, because there's a really nice parallel in some ways between Wilds, Disease, and Strife, of each one effectively, before any like adversary effects are considered, stops 1 invader action. Wilds stops 1 explorer from spawning. Disease stops 1 building from building. Strife stops 1 invader from ravaging, or from dealing damage in ravage.
I don't want like a buff to the base token. I just mean like maybe adding a few events or a few maybe blight card effects or something that just kind of interacts with it, like push a wilds or something. Like, I don't know. Or if there's a wilds in target land, add a second wilds, or add a wilds to an adjacent land, like the jungle grows. And hey, maybe these effects are in future expansions. We were just talking about Branch and Claw. I'm just saying, in Branch and Claw, I just kind of feel like it's left out in that it really does it does the one thing, and that's roughly it.
Yeah, it outside of playing a game with Keeper the Forbidden Wilds, which we'll get to Keeper in a little bit, Wilds tokens are a little, I think, underwhelming relative to the others.
Yeah.
So shall we move from wilds to where the wild things are?
Yes, Kalen, I shall announce it. So the last token introduced in this set is the Beast token, and Beast tokens do nothing until acted upon.
Yes.
They do absolutely nothing just sitting there, but they have lots and lots of interactions with various things in the game. 7 majors, 5 minors, 3 uniques, and you'll never guess which of the 2 spirits interacts with the most. 4 fear cards, 1 blight card, and 16 events, as well as a starting beast that gets put down on every single board. Holy cow, beasts are a really interesting and wild token.
Yeah, I like beasts a lot. It's one of those where if I'm teaching a new player the game and I decide to include tokens, people will ask me, "Oh, what does the beast token do?" And I will look at them and say, "Nothing yet."
It waits. It prowls.
I'm a sucker for Sharp Fangs Behind the Leaves, and honestly, beast tokens are probably my favorite of the 4 token types that are in Branch and Claw. They'll get supplanted with Jagged Earth comes out and introduces Badlands, but for the time being here, beasts are absolutely amazing. I love the beast events. I love the beast powers, sea monsters, Insatiable Hunger of the Swarm. There's so much fun stuff with beast tokens.
Do you feel differently about beast tokens if you're not playing a beast spirit?
I mean, I'm of the opinion that Bringer of Dreams and Nightmares is actually a beast spirit because of the number of times I've tried to draft beast powers on it. So, yes. Still enthused?
Okay. Yeah. I don't know. Maybe it is weird because you will have a decent amount of games, or a non-zero amount of games, where the beasts sit there, they remove an explorer or 2, and then they don't do anything else because no one has any beast cards to do anything with them.
That is true.
You get event card after event card that's like, oh, destroy 2 explorers, destroy 1 explorer, do this. Oh, but there's just none in that land. And hey, I'm sure some people might say, well, Alex, you're not playing the game right. You got to put the explorers there. And what if I've killed all the explorers already, huh? What then? No, you definitely can play around them. It's maybe the token that has the most, like, I guess, skill ceiling to it, in that the more you learn about the game and the more you understand how the events based around them work, the better you're able to plan and try to push things into lands with beasts to get them to kill things. But even still, I feel like even if you're planning the best you can, there are still going to be games where beasts just sit there and do nothing.
Yeah, I think that some of this for me is that experientially, beast tokens lead to some of the highest highs in Spirit Island for me. Like, there's an event that's just, do 2 damage per beast in every land that has a beast token. And that has just won me games on occasion. Yeah. And it feels amazing, and it's this cool idea of like, the invaders were trying to get their foothold back, and suddenly all the beasts of the island charged them, and they were just like, nope, we're out. We're good. We're done.
Yeah, thematically it's fantastic, of course. And I like the fact that they kept it at beasts, because it means that beasts can be your typical like panthers or whatever, but they can also be a swarm of birds. They can be fish, maybe not fish, but like, I think there's a power that looks like it's adding fish, so maybe like a swarm of piranhas or something. Yeah, sharks leaping out of the water to get you, or maybe just the sight of these ferocious beasts has done enough damage to these poor explorers. Beasts are a cool token. I think a little bit about beasts are tied to randomness in the game, and how much you like randomness might depend, of course, depending on the player. But I think having I said it, but they are kind of the wild card. They're not wilds, but they're the wild card of the tokens, that they can theoretically do basically anything, depending on what spirit you're playing, what cards you draw, what events come up. Like, yeah, it's cool to have something like that.
So, should we talk about what cards come up a little more and move on to the event deck?
Yeah, let's get eventful.
So, one of the things that we talked about a little bit, I think, in our base game review was how weird it is to think about the game without events
Yeah.
at this point. And just having played so much of the game with events, it does indeed feel weird to me to go back without the event deck anymore at this point. And
Yeah.
this is the OG event deck in Branch and Claw. And it's really cool in a lot of ways and really frustrating in a lot of ways.
Yeah. So the event deck is 25 cards, give or take a France slave rebellion, which may or may not be in the deck depending on if you're playing with France.
Yeah, and those cards have all kinds of different effects. In Branch and Claw, I think they're a little bit less sort of balanced or nuanced relative to what we see in future expansions. And by that, I guess what I'm trying to say is the events tend to feel like, oh, here's the good part. Oh, here's the bad part. And the event overall tends to feel very good or very bad for you, depending on which part is relevant to your current board state. With beast tokens, if you have beasts in lands with explorers and you get the event that destroys beasts or explorers in lands with beasts, great, that's awesome. If you get the thing that lets Dahan defend and you didn't have a defend power this turn and you were just relying on a trust fall, awesome. But if things go wrong and you get an event that just has the bad stuff trigger, like, oh, you need to add a town and none of the good stuff triggers, it's like, okay, well, this just feels bad now.
Yeah. So to break it down a little bit statistically, event cards come in a few different flavors. There are 9 of them that are choice events, where you can, some of them that let you use elements to pay for them, some of them don't. There are 9 of them that are either have different effects based upon whether it's a healthy island or a blighted island. And there's 4 of them that depend on the stage of the invader deck, and 3 of them that depend on the stage of fear that you're at, what terror level it is. And then each event card is also broken down into sections. There's always a top section, which is usually decently negative to the player, although there are some effects in there that can be pretty good or decent. Then there's a section that's reserved for either beasts or disease, and then a last section that is reserved for the Dawn, although that's for some reason not in all of these.
Yeah, and that's sort of like I think especially in Branch and Claw, they stuck to more of a template almost, it feels like, for the events, and just varied from it pretty rarely, whereas again later expansions I think really got more creative in what things could be on an event card. I will say also that in this expansion there are 3 events that are no longer in the game technically if you're playing with the most updated rules. There's a Strange Madness among the beasts, which is way too powerful for the players, especially if someone has a beast token producing power. Outpaced, which everyone hates but is actually good for the players, and so that should really not be in the game, or at least that's my take on it. And then War Touches the Island's Shores, which was replaced in the Nature Incarnate expansion with Far Off Wars Touch the Island, I think. I don't remember what the replacement's name is, but that one was just, again, very swingy. If it came up on turn 2, you could destroy all the coastal cities and just have the game end almost immediately. And it was just weird.
I'm pretty sure Branch and Claw has the most retired or replaced cards in all of Spirit Island. And I mean, what that tells me is just that they took big swings, and I appreciate that they did that, and I also appreciate that they kind of reevaluated and fixed this later on.
Yeah, and I think there's some talk too about there's a couple of other events that I wanted to mention specifically. Farmers Seek the Dahan for aid. I often see groups mulliganing it or banning it outright, just as a house rule.
I believe it's set to be removed, right?
I've heard rumor that in the next big expansion, which we don't know very much about, there's going to be some kind of replacement event for it. Okay. Which sounds really nice to me. I've definitely had a lot of games with farmers coming up that just went off the rails, and sometimes that's fun, but often it's just frustrating.
Yeah, that's fair.
And then the other event I want to touch on quick is Years of Little Rain, which I think I honestly would almost want to remove from the event deck at times, just because I feel like it's so good for the spirits.
Yep.
It just, even the bad version of the choice on it is still potentially really good for the spirits. And that just doesn't feel... Again, with I feel like they got better at designing these events as they did more design work on the game, and so this being the first pass of the event deck, there's going to be some that are just a little bit too strong in one direction or the other.
Yeah, that's fair. So, yeah, I think one of the biggest things... So I played a bunch of games on Steam with Jagged Earth removed, and just to play the Branch and Claw experience. And I think one thing you kind of notice with these event decks is that because so many of these cards, like a third of them, are these choice events, where one effect is generally better, but you have to pay for it. Well, one effect is better, but you have to pay for it. And then sometimes there are some that you don't have to pay for. But because there's so many of these choice events that you have to pay for, it just feels like you can get bombarded turn after turn with, okay, I guess I gotta forget this card. I guess I gotta discard this. I guess I gotta take the worst effect here. I feel like those cards, I like them being in the game. I like having to make choices that might end up being painful, having to forget a card or discard a card or whatever. But having so many of them that you could draw turn after turn when you just got no more energy for it, like it's not great. It's not. I wish there was more of the other events, and I think that future expansions kind of fix this by diluting the deck a little bit.
I will say that one thing I really like about the Aided by Element events is that it leads to some really interesting forks in the road that you're not going to expect in a game of Spirit Island. So I was playing a three-player game of Spirit Island with, I think it was Ocean, River, and Wind Lightning, because someone suggested that I try out the trio, or try out Wind Lightning with Ocean, and I was like, well, I should do the trio, because that's one of my favorite three-spirit combinations. Anyway, turn 2, New Species Spread came up, and I was like, okay, if I want to not have this go back into the deck, New Species Spread is an event. It's aided by Moon. You have to pay 4 energy per player, or else it does some bad stuff and then gets shuffled or put under the top 2 cards of the event deck. And I was like, I want to pay for this. I have 3 energy between my spirits. Okay, Ocean, let's forget half of your cards. And let's just see if we can recover from that. Because it made the game so much more interesting to have Ocean playing with way fewer cards than it usually does. I did way more reclaims than I usually do, but I had Wind Lightning, who gave me extra range, which we talked about in our gift guide for Ocean, as being this huge boon. And it was really interesting to see how differently the game turned out because of that event coming up on turn 2 and forcing me to make a really extreme decision to pay for it.
It's also interesting, so we didn't specifically spell it out, but all of these are a certain amount of energy per player, usually 4, and they're aided by the element, which means that each element of a card you've played, or one that's on your spirit board, lets you cheapen that cost. So theoretically, you could end up with a situation where you don't have to pay any energy because you already have them. You can also discard a card from your hand that has that element to get 2 of them, to discount it by 2, or forget a card to essentially pay for your share of the cost by getting 4 energy.
Yeah.
And I think that this effect, so even though it does say per player, 4 energy per player, 3 energy per player, whatever, I will say it's benefited greatly by more players, because the odds that one of the spirits is going to have that element as a main element, right, that they already have 2 or 3 of them out, or a card, many cards in their hand they can discard, or one of those spirits is a big energy spirit like Keeper, that can just kind of tank it and pay for everyone. That goes up. So even though the cost is the same whether you're playing one spirit or 10 spirits or whatever, I think that the more spirits you're playing with, the easier that burden is.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. Just being able to have that flexibility, especially because you don't know which of the aided by element events are going to come up in any given game. Maybe you need Sun one game, maybe you need Moon in one game, and it's going to vary from game to game which one to do. So that variety again, I think, is really helpful.
Yeah, I do also want to talk about Sacred Sites Under Threat, because I hate the wording of this card. The wording of this card drives me nuts. Let me read it out loud and sound how weird it sounds. So you can either let the island's strength repulse them, where each sacred site pushes 1 explorer/town to an adjacent land, and then you remove 1 blight per player from the blight card, returning it to the box. Or you can guard them yourself for well or ill, which costs 3 energy per land where you do damage, aided by fire. And then in each land with sacred sites and invaders, you either do 2 damage or destroy 1 presence from each spirit. Yeah. So it's an option that has a sub-option, which is fine. It's fine, but the way the card is formatted if you glance at this card, I don't know, like I don't know.
It's confusing. I definitely get you on
all.
that, and I think that I don't know if there's a better way to word it. I haven't seen any like attempts at alternatives for that card, but it does feel like that one could be worded better if you spend some more time with it.
Yeah. I also, for some reason, you can spend a bunch of element on the digital version that you don't actually end up needing. Like, it doesn't tell you how much you need to do 2 damage to every sacred site. You have to kind of look, and you can accidentally overspend. Okay. Yeah, I don't know. Maybe that's just a me issue. Maybe I'm misunderstanding the card still, but sometimes I feel like I forget or I discard a card or something for extra energy, and I don't realize that my sacred site doesn't have anything to do damage in, because it's 3 damage in lands where you do, or 3 energy per lands where you do damage, aided by fire. But it's each lands with sacred site and invaders, so it has to have invaders and a sacred site, and you have to pay the 3 energy. I don't know. I don't hate the card or anything. I just feel like formatting wise, there's something about it that doesn't click in my brain.
Sure.
But yeah. So anyway, event cards overall, one of the neat things that they do is that they give the island like texture. It lets the Dahan have some level of agency in terms of, they don't do a ton generally, but they can defend a little bit. They can move around. They can add Dahan because some of them come of age or whatever. That's really cool. And then it does the same thing for the beasts, as well as just a little bit for disease, and then every so often strife as well. I don't think I mentioned that when we talked about strife. That it's curious that, like, again, going back to my point that wilds maybe could use a little bit of extra interesting things happening to it. The fact that there are some cards that have stricken, which is in lands with disease or strife, invaders skip ravage actions.
Yeah. I don't know. I think overall, the event deck in Branch and Claw is actually still really well made. Like, even for all of its flaws. And I think that when people first start with the event deck, it's like, okay, this makes the game a little bit harder because you can't predict as much stuff. But I think for the experienced player, it actually is slightly favorable to have the event deck.
Yeah.
And that's kind of just really cool to me, is that's in the game, and that like it has this really cool skill curve, and it's just a really fun thing to learn.
Yeah, I'll take as many unfortunate bad beats or just like awkward cards that I draw that don't work out for me in trade for getting situations where the Dahan provide that one extra defense you needed, and that makes you win the game, or that protects the Dahan enough to do damage back and get rid of that city. Like, there are so many great feeling moments where you're like, oh no, I don't even have any fear cards, like what am I gonna do? I tried the best thing that I could, and then boom, the event card saves you, and that just feels really good. Especially when, like you said, if you're an experienced player, get those explorers in lands with beasts. Get Dahan in lands where maybe one defend could help you. Playing to those edge cases, you're right, once you know more about the event deck, once you've understood it better, and especially at this stage when there's only 25 cards, it's not that hard to do. It helps, and it makes you feel like you've executed a plan and taken a little risk, and then the risk pays off and you feel great.
Yeah. One last thought on events from me, which is some people really do hate them, and I get that. It took me a while to get used to them early on, and it's not in Branch and Claw, but it was in the digital version of Branch and Claw when it came out. It's the Command Beast option that was introduced with Jagged Earth. And I think it's a really fun alternative rule. Basically, you don't play with events, but you get 1 extra fear card in Terror level 2 to make it a little bit harder. And you add, these 2 Command Beast cards, one at the beginning of stage 2 in the Invader deck and one at the beginning of stage 3. And you just get to once per game in the fast phase once you have that card unlocked. Each beast on the island does a damage, moves to an adjacent land, or if there's an invader present, generates a fear. And it's this really cool little way to simplify the game, still use tokens, but not have to deal with the event deck if you're the kind of person who really hates it. And again, I just appreciate that while that's not as much for me anymore, unless I'm doing speedruns, in which case it's very much for me, but it's not as much for me anymore when I'm just playing the game more casually, but it is something that I just appreciate the modularity of that.
Yeah, it's yet another way that the game designers have thought about trying to make it available for everyone to play in the way that they want to play. So, and that sounds like it could be its own episode at some point, maybe. I've never tried it. I've never tried those, so that could be something interesting. But yeah, we're going to take a short break, and when we come back, we will talk about the rest of the box. And we are back.
Hello, everyone.
Two whole spirits. Whoa.
Yeah. Now this is the smallest cohort of any expansion. Every other, I mean, debatably, Promo Pack 1 and 2 each only had 2 spirits, but those have been rebundled as Feather and Flame, which now has 4. And so this is I think one of the reasons Branch and Claw kind of gets looked down on sometimes as an expansion is that players look at the spirit count and say, why would I buy an expansion that only has 2 spirits in it when I could buy an expansion that has 10 spirits in it or 8 spirits plus a bunch of aspects?
Yeah, I'll have more to say on that when we talk about the legacy of Branch and Claw at the end of the game. At the end of this episode. But yeah, it's true. Looking at it, it is definitely noticeable because that's something that they kind of, I feel like, put front and center, right? With brand, even just with branding of the boxes, they show all the spirits and stuff, and just knowing it's just the Branch and the Claw, it definitely, I don't know, doesn't look as exciting as the other ones. But the thing is, you don't know how cool that the event deck and the tokens are until you start playing with them. So it's harder to sell those.
Yeah, and I think that some of it too is that, again, if you look at the box art for Branch and Claw, like, yeah, it's Keeper and Fangs, cool. Yep. They're gonna be right there. Both of them are good spirits, I think, and really interesting. And I think that they tend to get passed over again because people are like, oh well, it's this tiny expansion, why would I get that? Which is unfortunate because, I don't know, Sharp Fangs Behind the Leaves might well be my favorite spirit at this point in the game. And Keeper of the Forbidden Wilds is probably overpowered, but also still a really fun, interesting spirit.
Yeah, I quite like Keeper. I like Fangs as well. So I think we should maybe say at this point that we have an upcoming episode on Sharp Fangs Behind the Leaves.
Yeah, we'll be talking about them in about 2 weeks. If things work out.
Yeah, maybe don't give the specifics, but we'll be talking about them very soon. And yeah, we'll probably also get to Keeper at some point in the future, not like a million episodes in. So we're not going to do deep dives on these spirits, but I think there is some stuff to say, especially in the context of the set, because as we mentioned, they are each focused on one of the different tokens.
Yeah, Keeper is focused on Wilds tokens, which, you know, when Keeper is in the game, suddenly the Wilds tokens are way more interesting. Because Keeper has an innate power that adds Wilds tokens. Keeper only can grow to lands that have Wilds tokens, unless you unlock its growth that requires you to pay energy. And also has a card that deals 2 damage per Wilds token in a land, which can be a huge source of damage, depending on how well you stack them up.
Yeah, it's true. You will see Wilds a lot more with Wilds. And yeah, Wilds is cool because it's a big energy spirit, basically. You don't have to play it that way, but if you max out the top track, you get 9 full energy in addition to the fact that 2 of the 4 of its growths give you an energy, and you get to pick 2 growths on top of that. So you are going to have energy to spare with this spirit, which is nice if you have to pay those event cards. It's also just nice in general.
Yeah. And then Fangs is a beast-focused spirit, which, again, we talked about the beast tokens don't do anything yet. Well, if Fangs is in the game, they do something right away. And Fangs is a phenomenal spirit, in my opinion. And I'm gonna try and channel the KSP for a moment and say that, yes, Fangs does have a special rule that lets you convert presents to beast tokens.
Yeah.
You should use that special rule.
Sure does.
It will be amazing.
Especially if you know you're going to get kicked out of a land with a Ravage. There's no reason not to.
Well, playing Russia maybe, but again, not this box.
Yeah. So, just like Wilds, Keeper also has pick 2 growths, and I do like that they kind of made these spirits mirror each other in some ways, that they're both token focused, they're both pick 2 growths. They both let you add lands, add presence in lands where their specific token is. I feel like, I don't know, I like that. There's just something about my brain that's like, I appreciate the symmetry of this. I will say, I have maybe forgotten once or twice or like 4 times to have done the pick 2 part of the growth. And when I say that many times, I mean that many games, not times. The fact that I've still been able to win with these spirits despite picking 1 growth, I think maybe tells you that they do have some decent power in there. But yes, please don't forget, pick 2. Always pick 2. Pretend that you're a Panera. You pick 2.
Fangs and Keeper The only other thing I'll add right now that's kind of cool is that both of them have a growth option that actually costs energy, which I believe is the first instance of that occurring in the game, because none of the base game or promo pack 1 spirits had that. And so that's kind of cool. It's a little frustrating sometimes on Fangs to be like, oh, I want to reclaim. Oh, I have no energy. Whoops. But even so, it's still I think a very well designed spirit, very interesting kit, lots of cool things to talk about with that.
Yeah, so. And I think the fact that both of them also do give you reclaims in their bottom tracks is helpful.
Oh yes.
The fact that both of these spirits have pretty like low complexity special rules makes them pretty approachable for newer players. Their rules are very easy to understand and don't even do things a lot of the time. So I think that these are spirits that are nice to once you've kind of gotten over doing the either base games, low complexity, or the Horizon spirits or whatever. These are nice spirits to move on to once you know a little bit about the game, because it doesn't require a lot of rules baggage.
So one of the really cool things about Fangs and Keeper is that both of them are very good against the adversary that comes in this box, which is France. So let's talk about the French a little bit.
Oh man, after last week.
Don't play France with Ward the Shores. That's in Branch and Claw, but we had that go poorly. So let's maybe avoid that
goodness. One. Well, yeah, I would say don't play France with a scenario you're not familiar with. I think maybe that's a broader thing. France is a very interesting scenario, or very interesting adversary. It has a loss condition that is very prominent.
So the loss condition is you can't have more than 7 towns per player on the island.
And it's before setup.
And so that means that any towns that are added to the island in setup, whether from higher levels of France or from scenarios or anything like that, count against it. It's kind of pretty hard to deal with, and I feel like I lose most of my France games to running out of the town pool, rather than blighting out or losing all my presents or anything like that. But it is interesting. And then the escalation is after they explore, you get to choose a land they explored into, and if there's a town in it, you add or a town or a city in it, you add a blight, and otherwise you add a town, which pressures that 7 town limit again.
Yep. Yeah, it puts pressure on you in either the blight limit or the town limit. And we won't read out all of the levels, but important to note that once you hit level 2, there is the Slave Rebellion card, which is actually a good thing for you. But you put it under the top 3 cards of the event deck, and then it basically lets you put Strife on towns.
And then destroy those towns if there's Dahan in the land, which then creates more Dahan. And it's really, really awesome if you can line it up, and don't forget about the Slave Rebellion event like I always do.
Yeah, so I mentioned it last week, but France is you have to keep track of this adversary the most of any adversary, I'd say, just in terms of the towns, even the blight, because there are things that they do pressure you blight-wise as well. Towns blight when that Slave Rebellion card's coming up. It's a lot. It's not necessarily like a crazy, crazy hard adversary, but it is one that you need to be paying full attention or you will lose.
Yeah. Another podcaster, Tepid Goose, did a deep dive into France recently and had a Reddit post about this, and there were lots of people talking about just the mental overhead of France. And I think that because of all this, honestly, France is probably my least favorite adversary. I made a comment on the thread on Reddit about it, where I was like, this adversary to me feels like 3 kids in a trench coat trying to sneak into a movie theater. And it's just the effects. There's 4 different things going on with France, and it's so easy to forget any one of them. And that can just either you play the rules wrong if you're playing in physical, or if you're playing on the digital version, you suddenly lose, or occasionally, in the case of Slave Rebellion, suddenly win and don't understand why. Which is, or you understand why, but it's just, I wasn't expecting that. I guess the game's over now.
Right. I think something to note about the towns especially is just how abruptly you can lose. So something I very much wanted to point out is just that in Branch and Claw, Yeah, there is at least 7 events that can add towns, right? That either like replace an explorer or just add a town. Now, some of those are options, right? You can choose a different option, or they won't pop up if your island's healthy or blighted or whatever. But still, the fact that you can lose just based upon an event card just being unfortunate, right? And it's an effect of adding a town in any other situation is not an auto lose. It's not even like an oh no. It's just like, oh, okay, whatever. But in this specific adversary, you can come up with that card and just lose on the spot, and that's it.
Yeah.
And that's rough. And there's a blight card as well that adds towns, or adds a town.
Yes.
And that's in this set. I'm not even talking about other sets that could potentially add more or less, or dilute the deck, whatever. But just 7 out of the 25 events is it's rough. It's just really rough. And ironically, I have to say, I think I would appreciate France more if it was introduced before event cards, because of that little bit of variance and randomness that can really mess you up. Because I feel like because in the base game, you always know when a town is coming down. None of the blight cards have any towns added. There's nothing like weird effect going on that you don't already know about. Anything that's modified with the scenarios or other adversaries, you know is happening. You know where they're gonna build, right? So it's like, aside from anything that adds a town when you explore because of acceleration or whatever, not acceleration, Escalation, sorry, because of escalation. I feel like the base game would be a nice place to play France.
So one of the cool things about the digital version, or at least previously about the digital version, I don't know if there's been a patch that changes this, you actually can play France with the Branch and Claw content turned off.
Oh.
If you've bought the Branch and Claw expansion for the digital version. So I've actually played a game of France where there were no events and no tokens, and basically the way the game handled it was Slave Rebellion was the only thing that produced strife.
Huh.
And I wasn't using any of the powers from Branch and Claw, and Slave Rebellion just came up every 4 turns despite not having an event deck. And it was actually a really interesting game still.
Yeah, nice. Yeah, for all the stuff I'm talking about France, I do appreciate it. I think that it is a nice challenge, but there is still a part of me that kind of wishes maybe it could be tweaked a little bit in some way. I feel like in some ways, like the Habsburg mining expedition, which has you check for lost condition at the end of the fast phase, I feel like in some ways that's a better way of doing it than just, well, you need to place a town and you can't place a town, you lose. You know what I mean? Like, I feel like giving you a little bit of a chance to do something, and especially if an event comes up that really messes with things in that specific adversary, you have time, you have a slow phase and then another fast phase to deal with it. Whereas in this one, the instant loss, and like you said, especially in digital, where it's it, you lose, you don't get a chance to undo it or do whatever. Like, it's done. Goodbye.
Yeah,
it's brutal.
I think if they were to go back and redesign France and England also, they would probably try and change the lost conditions to have triggers the way that HME does, or the Habsburg Mining Expedition, that is.
Yeah, that's fair.
I don't know for sure that they'd do that, but I think that would make them feel a little more fair in some ways.
Yeah. I will also say that this particular adversary is a lot harder with spirits that don't do a lot of direct damage. You know, there's spirits in the game that their shtick is more about pushing things around than killing things, and you need to be able to kill towns. You have to, and that's a little bit of a feels bad. Obviously, not every adversary can be balanced perfectly around every single spirit, but it does seem like I don't know. It seems like a problem.
Yeah, I don't know. France, I still enjoy playing. I mean, I already said they're probably my least favorite adversary. I think that they are still a fun thing to have in the game, and especially like being able to occasionally plan around Slave Rebellion and have these huge turns and just win games off of the event deck in this cool way is fun, and it creates good experiences.
Totally. I'm glad that they do. It's one of the rare adversaries that does give you kind of like a slightly helpful tool to deal with it, you know? Not a lot of adversaries give you like a bonus in addition to making things brutal, and that's really nice. One thing I do also have to say, and this happened to me recently, is the escalation, right? So if the land doesn't have towns, right? If the explored land doesn't have any towns, you have to place a town. You get no options. So in some cases, for some reason, if you're really good and have been like destroying things in that land or whatever, if it doesn't have a town, like you just killed a city in that land, right? Guess what? You have to place a town if you don't have an option in that other land. You have to place a town, and you can lose because of it. I had a situation where I lost because we were too efficient in clearing out the lands that the Explore card came up in, and that stinks.
Yeah. I'm sort of two minds on that, because on the one hand, like, that encourages a different line of strategic thinking in order to try and like avoid that situation coming up. But on the other hand, yeah, it's just a really negative experience when it happens, and just having that for someone who hasn't planned out all the edge cases, it just feels bad.
Yeah. All right, but yeah, that's fine. It's funny because I feel like I've avoided saying it's my least favorite adversary because I'm not really sure. I kind of have to reevaluate some of the other adversaries. But yeah, it's definitely down. France is not an adversary that you just want to casually play, in my opinion. It's one of those that if you are looking for a challenge, it's there, and that's good that it exists. But it's a weird adversary, and the fact that it's the only one introduced in this set is a little bit of a disappointment, I'd say. I guess if I was a big fan of adversaries, right, and I wanted something new after the base game, and it was just France, I wouldn't be the happiest with that.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I maybe want to give it some more credit, even as I'm bashing it, just because I do think that like all of the adversaries in this game are interesting, and so
yeah.
But I mean, obviously, I'm biased observer here, so.
All right, but we do have to move on. Maybe someday we'll do a full episode on France, or maybe we won't.
Yep.
Scenarios. Take it away, Kalen.
With pleasure. The only scenario I actually really enjoy in this box is Ward the Shores. There are 4 scenarios: Ward the Shores, Second Wave, Rituals of the Destroying Flame, and Powers Long Forgotten. Second Wave, I think, is the scenario most people are willing to play outside of the few of us who are scenario enthusiasts, because Second Wave is the sort of campaign version of Spirit Island. I don't personally enjoy it all that much, but it's fun to be like, oh, hey, I had all this stuff adjust the island, and, now I get to play a game on this very different setup board. It can be really cool. The third scenario, Rituals of the Destroying Flame, I just don't really like very much. I feel like scenarios sort of come in 2 flavors. One that adds things the players get to do, and one that removes things the players get to do. And I very much prefer the former. And Rituals of the Destroying Flame, to me, really feels like one that just removes things. And I just don't like it very much. And then Powers Long Forgotten exists, and I wish I could enjoy it, but I really do not. It's the treasure hunt kind of scenario. Is if the invaders get to a land first, they might get to explore and get a special power that makes the game harder. But if the spirits manage to get the Dahan to a land first, then they get to explore it and get a special power. And there's so much cool stuff in it that I wish I could actually trigger for myself, but I feel like it just always goes wrong. There's a lot of tokens that don't have any kind of powers on them. It's not for me. It's obviously not for me. So,
okay. Yeah.
I'm sure there's some people who really enjoy the mechanics of it, but I just don't get it very much.
That's fair. Yeah. No comment on Ward the Shores.
Yeah.
No. I like it in theory. And I gotta say, Second Wave, I definitely am yearning for like a campaign version of Spirit Island. I think that would be super cool. And from what I've seen, I've not played it. Hey, it's the best we got for right now. I wish it pushed it a little further, but
this might be something to talk about in a future episode. There are some fan-made campaigns for Spirit Island.
Ooh,
one in particular that I'll tell you about later.
Okay,
so.
Yeah, that's not in Branch and Claw.
That's not in Branch and Claw. So teasers.
Yes.
Anyway,
so Branch and Claw introduced 21 major powers and 31 minor powers, which greatly expands both of the decks.
Yeah, it almost doubles them, honestly. It's 22 majors before this, and now adding another 21, and was it 36? I think in the minors in the base game, and 31 new minors here, something like that. There's a ton of really cool new effects. Obviously, all the powers dealing with tokens and things that they wanted in the base game before tokens got split out to Branch and Claw needed to go in here. I honestly think that the powers in this are actually the main selling point of the box, which is kind of a weird take, but having played a bunch of stuff on the digital version without Branch and Claw and then with Branch and Claw, the thing that stood out to me the most as like what I appreciated was not the spirits, it wasn't the adversary, it wasn't even the event deck, it was the power cards. So many of my favorite power cards come from this set. It adds so much variety that the base game was lacking. Like, we complained a lot about only having 22 major powers in the base deck. And this just does so much to mitigate all those problems. And it's amazing.
Yeah, and I mean, some cool ones that we've talked about in various ways are in this set. Cast Down into the Briny Deep, Fire and Flood, Sea Monsters. Like, yeah, and of course, the best minor power, Gold's Allure, are all in this set. Yeah, but no, looking through them, I'm like, yeah, I use these cards a lot. Just even when I'm playing with future expansions, I feel like there's a lot of these that I'm just, these are good powers. I feel like they really hit a nice thing, and I think the token space opens them up for a little bit more variety, whereas the base game had a lot of stuff that was just kind of push one thing, or push Dahan, or this or that. This one can let you do things like add beasts or add disease, add strife, add whatever, and depending on the context of what's going on in the game, right? If someone's playing with a beast spirit, getting a power that lets you put more beasts is great and amazing. If someone's not playing with that spirit, maybe you don't want that card. So it allows for a lot more contextuality of when to take a card and when not to take a card, and I think that's great. That's what you want in a game where you're drafting cards.
Yeah, exactly.
We have to mention Growth Through Sacrifice.
Oh yeah, Growth Through Sacrifice. Speaking of things not being as balanced in Branch and Claw relative to some later the expansions, Growth Through Sacrifice is probably the most busted card in the game that is no longer in the game because they retired it officially with Nature Incarnate.
Yep.
I mean, Growth Through Sacrifice is a card that has a bunch of fine effects, but the upside was undercosted and the downside was overcosted. For those who don't know Growth Through Sacrifice well, basically it's a zero-cost power that lets you destroy a presence to let someone else add a presence to the island.
Or yourself.
Or yourself. Yeah, and there's a little more to it than that, but it has so much flexibility, so much power, and it probably should have cost 2 energy and not 0.
Which minor cards don't do, so yeah.
Which minor cards don't do, like, just in terms of... I think part of it is that when they were designing the game, they didn't think adding a presence was quite as powerful as it turned out to be, and they didn't think that they thought that destroying a presence was a slightly bigger cost than it turned out to be. And so Growth Through Sacrifice just hits both of those, and both of those got miscosted. It just is what it is.
Yeah, we talked about in Power Card Bingo just the kind of like knobs they can tweak when designing cards, and literally every knob in Growth Through Sacrifice has been tweaked to be better. It costs 0 instead of 1. It gives you 4 elements. It gives you an option of effects to do. It lets you target any player, not even just other players. It happens at fast, and if you have 2 sun, you can do both options. It's just like, holy cow. If you're new to the game and you just kind of look at the effects, maybe you're not that impressed with it, but just looking at all of the little edgy things that it does, it's no wonder why this card was taken out.
It was an interesting card.
Yeah. Yeah, I've never actually played with it. Have you?
Yes, plenty. We should find a way to play with it sometime. You'll get to experience quite the game with it but you'll probably only need to experience it once.
All right, fear cards.
Yeah, fear cards. I don't have a ton to say on these. I think it's nice that they added more to the deck and it adds some variety. It adds the token generation to the fear deck, some new mechanical space that wasn't really in the base game. I don't know. Do you have some more thoughts on the fear cards in Branch and Claw?
Not a ton. Demoralized is awesome. I like the defend 1, 2, or 3. It can edge case help you a lot. I almost
put in my notes that Demoralized is one of my least favorite fear effects.
Yeah, I bet you would, because you didn't like the you didn't like the minor power that adds defend in all of your sacred sites.
Yeah, you're right. Encompassing ward.
Yeah. Kalen hates.
Oh, that makes sense.
Kalen hates helping everyone. He is only in it to help very specific lands. No.
All for one, and that one is me.
One thing I will say is that with the addition of tokens, it does kind of lead to some lands that some fear cards that just are irrelevant in your situation. Like, you know, each player removes an explorer/town from a land with disease. Oh, well, there's no lands with disease. Great.
Yeah, you get some more whiffs.
Yeah, it can happen. But like with the major and minor powers, the fact that they have tokens to play around with, and especially they use Strife quite a bit, it just adds more variety in what you can do and the kind of cards they can print. They can make more powerful effects, but then limit them by saying it can only be done in a land with beasts or disease or whatever. So, yeah. And just, yeah, more variety is good. Adding to these kind of smaller decks from the base game is just always a good thing.
Speaking of adding variety to small decks from the base game, you want to talk about some blight cards?
Oh, yeah. Yes. This is like the variety that was so sorely needed. We did talk about it in the base game review, but holy cow, going from 2 to 9 blight cards makes the game a lot more surprising, I guess you can say.
Yeah, and I think that, like, with maybe one exception, I actually really like every blight card in Branch and Claw.
Interesting.
Yeah, I just there's so many cool things here. We introduce so base game had a 4 blight per player and a 5 blight per player card. Here we have two blight per player cards, two 3 blight per player cards, a 4 blight per player card, and 2 5 blight per player cards. And one of the 5 blight per player cards is really a 4 blight per player card, but that's a that's a slightly different story. Yeah. I will say one of these, again, on the balance perspective, has been removed from the game. Tipping Point, immediately destroy 3 presence from each spirit, 5 blight per player. That one did a little too much to constrain design space, from what I've heard, where certain spirits that just wanted to be low on presence could not thrive or exist in a world where Tipping Point could come up, especially once the expansions added even more blight cards.
That's fair. Yeah, one of the things I really like about the blight cards in this set is that most of them are immediately effects, which means you do them once, and then you don't have to think about it again. You don't have to worry about remembering every turn to remove presence or whatever. It's nice having those immediate. And I think I've talked about this, just that flipping the blight card can be kind of like the climax of the game. And when it's an immediately, it means that the invaders get a big boost right away, and then you kind of slowly work from there. And I think that works for me a lot nicer than the ones from the base game, which are just kind of like, you slowly fade away. It's just kind of like a slow, painful loss if you're going to lose to those blight cards from presence loss or whatever. Whereas I feel like these are a lot more big splashy. You're adding a lot of things to the island that can really mess you up. And I like that quite a lot.
Yeah, I will counter with the lower blight per player count cards do things that help the spirits a lot more. So, yes. Like, there's one that removes a town from every board and destroys a presence, but, you know, that could sometimes just win you the game if there's only a couple of towns left when the island blights. Mm-hmm. And that can lead to these really cool moments that could be kind of anticlimactic, but, you know, not knowing that the blight card is going to save you, or maybe just add 2 buildings to every one, like Promising Farmlands does, or every board, that is. And, I hate Promising Farmlands.
Yeah, I hate it in France, especially.
I like to play very tempo-focused games, and the invaders just suddenly get a new inland city and town, and I guess I won't be finishing this game very soon. I thought I was almost done, and actually it's going to take me another 3 turns. Yeah, I want to talk a little bit about the 2 blight per player cards for a moment. Okay. Just because, again, sort of balance issues, maybe. Aid from Lesser Spirits is amazing and probably way too good for the players in most games. If for those who don't know, Aid from Lesser Spirits is immediately draw a minor power card per player plus 1 more. Give 1 to each spirit. They may be used every turn as if played, but cost no card plays or energy. And then 2 blight per player on the card. And it's like, the game is about to end in a loss if we don't win, but we get a major power up. And and then the other 2 blight per player card is Back Against the Wall, which is just simply every spirit phase, each spirit gains +1 energy and +1 card play. And these cards, those 2 blight cards, I think are almost too good for the players, but also can just lead to these sudden losses. And there's actually a rule in Solo that if you draw a 2 blight per player card, you can mulligan it, like, officially.
Interesting. I feel like I was asked that once or twice, and I'm like, no, what is this? I play with the card I get.
Yeah, and the digital version has it implemented, which is why I know it's an official rule as opposed to just like a well adopted house rule.
Interesting.
It's really fun. And Aid from Lesser Spirits games, I think, are some of the most fun games I've ever played. Just because you get to do all of these crazy broken things with it. All right. Do we want to just talk about the box as a whole then?
Yeah, it's a very pretty box. No, sure.
Yeah. No, I used it to hold all my spirit panels for a very long time, and then I ran out of room, and so I rearranged my storage solution.
Yep. Like I said earlier, I think if you just look at it based on spirits, obviously you're going to be disappointed just on the count of spirits, not on the quality of the two included. And also, like, adversaries are another big thing that people very much care about, and I think if France is your only one, that's a disappointment. But, especially after you've played with this content, you see that adding the tokens, adding the event card, doubling the major and minor decks, and adding a ton more blight cards, like, these are all giant improvements on the base game, and I think that in general this is pretty important.
Yeah, for me, again, like talking about the power decks, the blight cards, a lot of the stuff that and the event deck just adds so much from this box that I think people tend to overlook. And I just I see a lot of posts on Reddit and Discord about, oh, hey, can I skip Branch and Claw and go straight to Jagged Earth because it has more spirits? And I just feel a little sad inside every single time I see one of those, because yes, you can, but I really don't think people should be sitting out on Branch and Claw. I think it's actually a much better box than it gets credit for.
Now's the point where we're going to also take into consideration kind of like the future things that happen in the game and everything. And I think the thing that Branch and Claw kind of has awkwardly is that if you get Jagged Earth, you do get all of these tokens, and you do get the event deck. You don't get the same cards, but the big content improvements that were in this one are also in a different set that does come with a lot of different spirits, and also adds a lot more cards and a lot of extra things. So it is kind of hard sometimes, because I feel like Jagged Earth is the more complete experience because of things like Badlands and Isolate, but Branch and Claw is still really cool. And the other thing that I think it kind of struggles with is that if you look at them on the shelf, you look at this kind of next to Feather and Flame, right? It's named similarly. It's a similar size box. But Feather and Flame does not include any changes to kind of like the core game rules. It's all just extra spirits and aspects and stuff like that, right? I don't think there's any...
It introduces Isolate, but yeah, and there's a couple of fear cards, but yeah, it's basically no impact to the rules of the game other than that. And Isolate in and of itself is not that complicated of a mechanic.
No. But yeah, so if you look at Feather and Flame and Branch of Claw on a shelf, you might think, oh, they're the same type of content, but like really they're not at all. It's very different. But yeah, I don't know. I think I might be guilty of just saying, well, I just recommend just going to Jagged Earth first. I don't think you should skip out on this entirely, but if you have the money, it's tough. We'll talk about it more with Jagged Earth, obviously.
Yeah, that's fair. I'm just a little sad. I die a little inside now.
I'm sorry. It's okay. I think we made a great case for why this box is definitely important. And hey, it's cheaper than Jagged Earth, so...
That is true. If you want the event deck, but don't have quite the budget for Jagged Earth, I think Branch and Claw is a very good way to go.
Yes, and also, yeah, if you do want more incremental improvements where you don't have all of these rules thrown at you at once, only having 4 instead of 5 of the tokens definitely helps. So, yeah.
Well, thanks everyone for tuning in this week. We really appreciate you listening to the podcast. We've been getting some good feedback from people on things like my mistakes with Gold's Allure and Alex's mistakes when it comes to all sorts of things. No, excuse me.
Hey, listen, we have our own opinions here. We're not podcast by committee here.
That's true. So we'd love to keep hearing from you. Let us know on YouTube, on Reddit, on Discord. We've got some thoughts about changing some things up with our Discord presence in the future to try and get more people involved in conversations. So if you have any thoughts on that kind of stuff, let us know what you'd like to see. We thank you so much again for listening, and we'll catch you next week.
Thanks, guys. Bye.